From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio on the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. November 2, 1998 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. WCW Halloween Havoc Recap. Details on the show going long plus tons of news. By Observer staff. What appears to be a seven-figure catastrophe will ironically be viewed by people who see pro wrestling as nothing more than a Monday night ratings battle as a brilliant maneuver. It wasn't either brilliant nor a maneuver, but the end result of approximately 25% of the systems, a figure based on what we're hearing may be a low estimate, shutting off the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view on October 25th early and WCW putting the Bill Goldberg vs. Diamond Dallas Page title match on free Nitro the next night was that Goldberg vs. Page broke the all-time cable television viewing record by doing a 7.18 rating. Best rating for a cable match in more than 10 years dating back to the final quarter of a 45-minute live draw with Ric Flair vs. Sting on March 27, 1988 which did a 7.8 and 10.2 share in 5,367,000 homes or approximately 7,782,000 viewers. This broke the all-time viewership record set on July 9 for the Hulk Hogan vs. Goldberg title change which was a 6.91 rating in 5,045,000 homes. What was doubly amazing is that this record was set during football season, when traditionally a percentage of the wrestling audience is siphoned off. Largely because of that one match and a strong first hour, no doubt built by curiosity stemming from the fiasco the previous night, WCW did one of its best ever ratings on October 26 for a head-to-head situation with a 5.06 rating, 5.69 first hour, 5.19 seconds hour, 4.37 third hour, and 7.60 share. Raw did a 4.48 rating, 4.36 first hour, 4.59 seconds hour, and 6.82 share. In the opposed 2 hours and 6 minutes, Nitro did a 4.76 rating. If you take out the first quarter with the Goldberg-Page match which destroyed Raw's 3.31 opening quarter, Nitro did a 4.44 and Raw did a 4.64. While some would claim this as Nitro ending Raw's 5-week winning streak, the reality is over that 5 weeks when it came to viewers it was really 3 wins for Raw and 2 for Nitro, although both Nitro wins and 1 Raw win should realistically be called ties. In actual viewers numbers over the head-to-head 2 hours and 6 minutes, Nitro had 5,017,000 viewers, consisting of 2,588,000 adult males, 1,196,000 adult females, 628,000 kids 11 and under and 605,000 teenagers. Raw's 4,648,000 viewers consisted of 2,234,000 adult males, 939,000 adult females, 501,000 kids 11 and under, so Nitro beat them handily, and 974,000 teenagers, the age group Raw remained dominant in. The Steelers-Chiefs football game head-to-head did a solid 14.5 rating and 24 share. Havoc went about 3 hours and 22 minutes in a time slot originally scheduled for a maximum of 250. The decision to go past the scheduled 3 hours was a late decision, perhaps decided as late as the day of the show. WCW had planned the show out to go 3 hours and 15 minutes and much of the heat has fallen on a company liaison to viewers' choice and the cable industry, who apparently didn't get the word out of the importance that the show was going longer than its initial scheduling. Because of that, about 25% of the systems around the country cut the show off before its conclusion, with different systems cutting it off at different times. Some systems went down at about the 2-hour, 55-minute mark, or just before the finish of the Hogan vs. Warrior match. Some went down at the 3-hour, 5-minute mark which would be during the ring introductions of the Goldberg vs. Page match. Cable companies around the country, including Time Warner in New York and many of the TCI systems including major markets like Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area, cut the show off before its conclusion and offices were flooded with irate phone calls for the next 2 days, many viewers vowing to buy satellite dishes to avoid this happening again. How systems handled the problem varied. Most offered viewers the choice of the Tuesday replay for free or a rebate on the purchase price of $29.95, which varied from $10 in some systems, $20 in others, and the entire purchase price in others. Virtually all callers were said to have taken the rebate rather than the Tuesday showing. The cable industry was said as a whole to be irate, because this was scripted pro wrestling, and not a shoot sport like UFC which had a similar problem in shows in 1994 and 1995. And it caused untold man-hours of listening to irate callers over the next 2 days. compounded supposedly by charges. WCW people have claimed this and addressed the complaint on the air, and we don't have any confirmation that they actually happened. By competitive wrestling groups that WCW did this on purpose as a ratings ploy for the next day. The cost of that win. And I want to make clear that I'm virtually certain the pay-per-view snafu the previous night wasn't a ratings ploy but a major screw-up within WCW, even though WCW no doubt was desperate to win the ratings, would be estimated at more than $2 million, shared equally by WCW/Time Warner and the cable industry. If one would presume Havoc doing 400,000 buys, a 1.16 buy rate, then approximately 100,000 homes were cut off before the main event. Given these figures, and they are all approximations, from a WCW standpoint, the show that would gross an estimated $5.15 million should now gross more like $4 million. Eric Bischoff, claiming that his conversations with Viewers' Choice to explain the problem the next day saw him confronted with executives who claimed that officials of Titan Sports had told them this was all a ratings ploy. Bischoff had Tony Schiavone explain that contrary to what the competitors were saying, it wasn't a ratings ploy and that they don't resort to shock value, a knock at the October 19th Raw, to win the ratings like the competitors. Because of all the controversy, Bischoff rescinded the original plan to give out the result of the Raw main event between Steve Austin and Ken Shamrock on the taped show during the first hour of Nitro. Schiavone claimed WCW was the only wrestling company truly concerned about its fans, and said because of that they were going to air Goldberg vs. Page in its entirety, and hyped the match throughout the show as being the greatest world title match he had ever seen. While it was a good match to be sure, it could hardly come close to living up to that type of hype, but hype is part of the business and it surely led to the monster rating. There was a lot of heat on Schiavone for continuing after the match had aired to proclaim it as the greatest title match he ever saw, which many saw as a slap in the face of all the great Ric Flair matches over the years and of his credibility because it was a good match. But it wasn't even close to the best match that aired on that episode of Nitro. They explained the reason they weren't going to air the replay show on October 27th for free was because it wouldn't be fair to the people who had paid money to see Havoc live. He, however, said they wouldn't air the finish of Hogan Warrior, which was also cut off in a number of systems, because it was too controversial. Actually, the main reason for this is the belief that showing the finish of both Hogan Warrior and the complete Page Goldberg match would kill the minimal replay business. And not really because the Hogan Warrior finish was so atrocious that it was better off not seen by the masses. There ended up being tremendous heat in the cable industry for this decision because showing the Goldberg match free was seen as killing any interest in buying the replay, which was going to be edited down to just under 3 hours. Schiavone emphasized this was a one-time thing, but WCW did not take any blame for the fiasco either, saying it was out of their hands when in fact it was the company's decision to go long for no good reason. In the first 2 years of UFC, there were 2 pay-per-view shows that went past the 3-hour mark, with the main event being cut off the pay-per-view in 20% of the markets, but UFC is a shoot event. The first time was when no UFC matches were going past 5 minutes and the Hoist Gracie vs. Dan Severn match ended up going 16 minutes, which is largely the point where time limits for matches were introduced. The second was when power went out at the live event at a show in Buffalo, which caused the show to be delayed, and wound up with the tournament final going past 3 hours and also being cut off in parts of the country. In the quarter-hour comparisons, Nitro captured 5 of the 8 quarters, but the Raw main event of Austin vs. Shamrock in an I Quit match beat Nitro's Page vs. Bret Hart US title change, with Raw doing a 4.63 final quarter and 5.14 overrun to Nitro's 4.27 final quarter and 4.33 overrun. Since Nitro usually wins the climax, the probable cause, and this is not a knock at Page, is that you simply can't do 2 high-profile long matches with the same wrestler on the same show, and that is whether the guy is Page, Hulk Hogan, Goldberg, or Steve Austin. If they are overexposed in a show, they aren't going to mean the big boost for the climax most of the time. From the second quarter, Nitro did a 4.7, Nash interview and Angle, Hogan interview to 4.5, Rock vs. Strohs. Nitro did a 5.0, Guerrero vs. Saturn, Judy Bagwell interview to 4.1, Motley Crue concert. Raw did a 5.5, Kane vs. Gangrel, beginning of Austin/MC Mahan/Shane segment, to 3.8, Rick Steiner and Chaos vs. Giant and Ray. Raw did a 5.1, ending of Austin/MC Mahan Angle, Godfather vs. Singh, to 4.3, Flair vs. Hogan 94, beginning of Guerrero vs. Kidman. Nitro did a 4.3, ending of Guerrero vs. Kidman, Scott and Buff interview, to 4.1, ICP and Oddities vs. Kaientai. Nitro did a 4.5, Warrior interview, Hall and Scott Steiner vs. Conant and Nash, to to 4.2, Mero vs. Goldust, Sable Challenge, Mankind and Snow interview. Before the final 2 quarters. A lot of people within pro wrestling, and a lot of pro wrestling fans, aren't going to like the upcoming NBC special Exposed, Pro Wrestling's Greatest Secrets, which airs on November 1st at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The 1-hour special is a basic, unsophisticated, condescending but for the most part accurate portrayal of the machinations of a pro wrestling match. The story is based around 8 pro wrestlers, a valet and referee, all disguised with new identities like All-American Boy, Bruce Force, Colossus, Private Pain, etc., masks and having their voices altered, who they claim were putting their careers on the line by exposing the secrets, which was a terrible overstatement. The special goes through the basics of a wrestling match, the basic moves and how wrestlers protect each other and attempt to avoid injury while doing the moves, how matches are called, how matches are booked, and tricks of wrestlers getting heat. While they didn't make a big deal about matches being predetermined, it was mentioned early but not played off as if it was any kind of revelation. They did try and make a big deal over the fact that the referee is in on the act. An unknown former wrestler named Doc Savage was the technical advisor, and according to those who worked on the show, he didn't seem to really know wrestling, and the original version was going to be that nobody gets hurt and all the moves are harmless. In the version that came out, it was clear that the moves can be dangerous if done wrong, and that even done right, wrestlers get hurt all the time from the pounding. Wrestlers were paid $2,000 for 4 days of filming in early September at the Grand Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles. Those recognizable included California Indies Michael Modest. He's in most of the scenes where the actual work looks really solid, Donovan Morgan and Max Justice along with the Pitbulls. Some of the moves are well executed and a few look cool, but much of the move for move is pretty well indie level stuff. Butch Reed and One Man Gang were both scheduled but backed out at the last minute. While doing the show certainly shouldn't blacklist anyone, there was concern from the big companies and Jim Cornette, who is largely in charge of finding new unknown talent for the WWF, did try and persuade some of the guys through their local promoters to not have them do the show. There is virtually nothing that would surprise any wrestling fan, although the announcer acts like they've exposed cons at every turn. Naturally, the show doesn't even come near the real cons of the business, as the wrestlers demonstrate how to do worked punches, suplexes, body slams, hurricane ranas and pile drivers. The show wrestlers take bumps in a spring-loaded heavily mic'd ring and show the padding under the canvas. Not all pro wrestling rings are spring-loaded and mic'd, but some are. They show how moves are sold for maximum effectiveness. They even show blading. They show the role of a booker, played by wrestling legend Harley Race, explaining in brief that guys are put together to draw money and explains he chooses the babyface and the heel, and who wins and loses. They don't even get into things like booking finishes to heat up and continue programs. While I'd label it as 90% accurate, many in wrestling will pounce on the inaccuracies, and the fact the look at pro wrestling is so simplistic, and the tone taken so condescending to its viewers, and that it comes off as a poor television show by network standards. From a wrestling standpoint, most teenagers with a few years of watching wrestling on television and nobody in the business filling them in on the secrets would be able to figure out for themselves much of everything revealed, although the show may fill in the intricacies. If anyone was afraid that the current pro wrestling boom could be jeopardized by this show or by any exposes, and thankfully not one person has even suggested that to me, as hopefully we've gotten past that mindset, they should rest easy. There were a few inaccuracies and dated references. They talked about babyfaces and heels in 70s terminology as far as the old clean-cut face and ugly, bullying heel. In the inaccuracy that will probably be seized on the most, and should be for that matter, they claim that the booker hands out the signs and posters to the crowd as they come to the ring as a way to make it look like the show is a big deal. They claim fans themselves actually don't bring signs to the arenas. How this inaccuracy made it to the air is mind-boggling. While it is true that promotions have passed out signs for TV tapings, and not that many years back, many if not most of the signs at WCW tapings in its dead period were produced by the company itself. That certainly is no longer the case. They talked about plants in the crowd, a little kid who a heel tears up the autograph book of, as usually being the son of the wrestler and a plant. No doubt that has happened, but that's not a regular routine as it was portrayed. They showed a heel shoving a grandmotherly ringside fan down to get heel heat, claiming that Granny and the people sitting with her getting upset about it are part of the troupe and on the payroll, and talked of it as being another wrestling con exposed. They showed the grandmother claiming she goes from town to town with the troupe backstage taking off pads. As much wrestling has gone on for the bulk of this century, probably everything in the world has happened, but in watching wrestling for 28 years live, I've never seen a heel violently shove down a grandmother to get heat, and while there are plants, more now than ever, to get physically involved at TV tapings, For the most part, they didn't exist in the old days of wrestling. I'd say virtually all the stereotypical grandmothers at ringside that certainly did exist in the 70s and still do to a lesser degree, were hardly on the payroll. They had an announcer at ringside giving the ref the time cues, which has happened, although nowadays the refs are hooked up with earpieces and get their time cues from the back. They showed the basics of the body slam, that it is the guy being slammed who does most of the lifting, that it is the guy taking the backdrop to propels much of the height by pushing off. They showed the old Billy Robinson backbreaker move, that is almost never used today in wrestling except by retro Tatsumi Fujinami, claiming it was more dangerous to the guy doing the move because he might get winded than the guy taking it, and showed how safe a leg drop was in slow-mo. They talked about pre-sawed trophies that have existed, salt actually being chalk or talcum powder, true, and that the chair shots aren't fake but they are given high to the back where the blows can be most easily taken. They didn't get into how to fake a brutal chair shot to the head. They claimed that tables weren't pre-sawed, but made of light particle board that breaks easily and that it is easier to take a bump through the table because of the give than on the floor. They showed the guy on the floor catching and protecting the guy doing a plancha. They claimed in blading, that it is the ref who hands the wrestler the blade. It sometimes has happened that way, but more often the guy has the blade in his trunks, taped up in his wrist or hidden elsewhere on him. They did conclude with the wrestlers all reciting a long list of injuries, and noted that one mistake in a move like a pile driver could result in a broken neck, that pro wrestling was a very dangerous business, and in a surprise, ultimately concluded that because of that, in fact, it is real. They concluded with the tired line as all the wrestlers stood in the ring looking menacing of inviting skeptical fans to get in the ring and try it. Conclusion. If you are someone who needs to see anything major involving pro wrestling, if you're curious about how wrestlers protect their opponent doing moves, it's worth your time. Don't expect to learn anything you don't know or to not be insulted by the few inaccuracies. For anyone else, you'll be far more entertained watching Sunday Night Heat. In probably the most significant heavyweight matchup of the year from a real as opposed to money drawing standpoint in MMA, obviously the highest profile match was Gracie versus Takada, although Gracie technically isn't a heavyweight. Former UFC champion Randy Couture tapped out to an armbar from Shudo heavyweight champion Enson Inoue in just 1:39 in the main event at the Shudo Valley Tudo Open Japan on October 25 at Tokyo Bay NK Hall. Couture, now 4-1, was ranked number 1 in the world in the heavyweight division in most insider newsletters due to wins in late 1997 over Vitor Belfort and Maurice Smith, the latter bringing him the UFC heavyweight title, the most highly recognized MMA title on a worldwide basis. Couture never defended the title due to a rib injury and later because of financial problems within Semaphore Entertainment Group resulting in a dispute with Couture's Raw team management, and he instead took the Japanese date. He was stripped of the UFC heavyweight title just 9 days earlier, before the UFC pay-per-view show, in order for UFC to set up an elimination process that is expected to crown a new champion in March. The result of this match on Shudo's traditional biggest show of the year, before 4,830 fans in the 7,000-seat gym, along with several other shoot matches over the past 2 weeks, shows that in a real situation, there can be no certainty in predicting outcomes when two top-level fighters are going at it. Inoue, 9-3, had been knocked out by both Igor Zinoviev and Frank Shamrock in his two highest-profile career fights. The Couture fight was said to be similar to one of his biggest wins, a UFC victory over former world-class wrestler Royce Alger in another short match ending with an armbar. The win, coming on the heels of the biggest heavyweight upset in modern shoot history, Marco Ruas lost to pro wrestler Alexander Otska, certainly throws any ratings of heavyweights into a total quandary, as 5 of the top 10 rated heavyweights in the world, Couture, Ruas, Pete Williams, Wanderlei Silva and Gary Goodridge, in the fighting sports news ratings were all defeated in the past 2 weeks, and 3 of the others, Tom Erickson, Maurice Smith and Mark Coleman, haven't actually won a fight during 1998, the former 2 because they haven't competed. This pretty well through process of elimination should leave Mark Kerr 10-0 as the man in the heavyweight division. Kerr is tentatively scheduled for his highest profile career match in February at Tokyo Budokan Hall for KRS against unbeaten legend Royce Gracie, 11-0-1, a match that has actually not officially been announced but which both are currently in training for. Gracie, who hasn't competed since his now legendary 36 minutes draw in 1995 with Ken Shamrock, is expected to compete in either MMA or Jiu-Jitsu rules in a tune-up match in Brazil on December 17, possibly against Mario Sperry, before the big match with Kerr. In recent years, the Gracies have developed a reputation for not getting into competition with the top names. Now that bigger athletes have started to learn the skills of fighting this style, a game the Gracies, with their experience from Brazil, were far ahead of the Americans in the learning curve during the early years in. Among insiders, their reputation took a major hit when Hickson had some trouble before putting away pro wrestler Nobuhiko Takada on October 11th. That makes the fact Hoist is apparently going to face Kerr. The two were scheduled for a match in early 1998, but Hoist pulled out due to an injury, and despite a lot of conjecture to the contrary, he legitimately did undergo major back surgery this year. Even more intriguing, even though the way the styles match up may make it a long and somewhat boring match and with no judges in Pride, Gracie may simply be able to hang on for a time limit draw against a man who will probably outweigh him by about 70 pounds, and Gracie is excellent at capitalizing on mistakes, so it's not impossible for him to win, although if he should do so it would qualify as a pretty major upset. Due to legal problems that resulted in Kerr's breaking his Semaphore Entertainment Group contract to work for more money for KRS, he has found himself somewhat ostracized from UFC, which is still considered the top competitive heavyweight venue, even though many of the big-name heavyweights have switched to KRS, and for those reasons, it seems next to impossible that he be involved in the UFC eliminations. Erickson, both due to his affiliation with the Raw team, and because UFC has always been leery of him with the belief that he's not marketable, then again, Couture had no charisma either, and would be extremely difficult to beat, has steered clear of him to this point in time, which has remained a very controversial subject within MMA. Erickson, the 1997 U.S. Super Heavyweight Freestyle Champion, is the largest and most powerful wrestler in the world that competes in this arena, and has a lot of knockout punching power, although no boxing finesse. Smith's name has also been brought up, but in his case the same financial problems that led to him leaving MMA to return to kickboxing with K1 haven't changed. Couture's loss actually makes the UFC tournament more viable in a sense, in that when Couture was stripped of the title, he was never beaten. The tournament would gain some credibility if Inoue would be invited in, but that would numerically mess up the deal, as the tentative idea is for Bas Rutten versus Tsuyoshi Kosaka and Pedro Rizzo versus Coleman in January, and the two winners facing for the title in Brazil in March. As mentioned last week, that has its problems because if Rutten and Rizzo win, they have already made it clear they won't fight each other because they are good friends. There is also another wildcard name that was brought up on the last UFC pay-per-view show, Ken Shamrock. Shamrock has shown a lot of interest in returning to UFC, although due to his WWF contract, that would require the okay from Vince McMahon, and challenging for the heavyweight title once again. A Shamrock returned to the octagon to challenge for the title he once held, particularly with his WWF fame and the current popularity of pro wrestling, should be a bigger draw than anything UFC could possibly put on the table over the next year, except that so few homes are cleared, so nothing right now can become a big money fight, although a lot of people expect that climate to change over the next year. A return by Shamrock would raise a lot of issues for both WWF and Semaphore Entertainment Group, because there is no guarantee of endings in something like this, and McMahon has a major need for control of nearly everything involving one of his highest profile stars. In addition, Shamrock, who it is said would be interested in a high-profile fight in Japan as well, would command a high price, and Titan would be getting a large chunk since the deal has to go through them, in a business where at this point UFC, due to its financial limitations, isn't paying anyone big money. In addition, on October 26th at the Pancrase show at Korakuen Hall, two of Pancrase's top stars, Masakatsu Funaki and Jason DeLucia, were upset by Kyuma Kunyoku and Keiichiro Yamamiya respectively, and Rumina Sato, Japan's biggest name lighter weight fighter who came into the Vale Tudo show with a 12-1-1 record, lost when the ref stopped the fight at 4:20 after being kicked in the face and stunned by a hard punch on the Shudo show's semifinal by highly regarded Brazilian jiu-jitsu teacher Andres Pederneiras. It once again shows that in this and similar shoot fighting style, anything can happen. Due to style, training, injuries and motivation level, it's a rock, paper, scissors deal. This simply isn't a sport where somebody can undisputedly be labeled the best or unbeatable like a dominating boxer or wrestler, because with so many offensive avenues open, everyone has weaknesses that can be exploited. Situations like the current Frank Shamrock 8-match winning streak against mainly top-name opponents is an accomplishment that isn't likely to be duplicated very often. While Halloween Havoc will probably best be remembered by the timing problems, the show did feature the rematch of one of the most famous matches in modern history, the Hulk Hogan vs. Ultimate Warrior match that headlined WrestleMania V at the Sky Dome in Toronto, which to this day the $3.4 million live gate remains an all-time North American record, and the total number of pay-per-view guys is among the all-time largest ever as well. In hyping the famous WWF match, WCW announcers tried to talk of it as being legendary and among the greatest matches of all time. The first meeting was something of a shocker at the time, and even placed fourth that year in the balloting for Match of the Year. It was a weird match, in that when watching it live it was great. It had excellent heat, A good storyline, no blatant missed moves, and was well choreographed in advance. Upon second viewing, the greatness of the match fell apart, which is in contrast to nearly every great match in history. At that point it comes across as a match with 70% of the time holding rest holds and with little in the way of anything special wrestling, although the heat was real great. Years later, when WWF replayed the match on television to hype one of Warrior's returns, people seeing it for the first time years later, based on standards that had changed, remarked about what a long boring match with nothing happening that it was. When word got out about the rematch in Las Vegas for Havoc, the initial thoughts were monster buy rate. And had Warrior made one TV appearance and disappeared in one of WCW's lame magic tricks, no doubt that would have been the case. Even with Warrior's character flopping, there probably was enough interest from the Havoc name and the hype for the top two matches that the buy rate should be very good, even if the profit margin looks to end up being a huge disappointment because of the timing fiasco. The show live at the MGM Grand Garden Arena sold out weeks in advance, with 10,663 paying $328,555. And while some of the show was good and none was great, the Hogan-Warrior rematch may very well have been among the worst high-profile wrestling matches of modern times. Spots missed as bad as guys in their first pro match, but with 240-plus former bodybuilders showing even less mobility and athletic ability than you would almost ever see in the ring. A babyface who clearly wasn't over and a heel that they clearly didn't like either than you would almost ever see in the ring. All climaxed by Hogan attempting to throw a fireball with flash paper and nearly setting his hand on fire, and then elevating his nephew into the mainstream by clocking his once legendary foe out with a chair. The match was so bad that anyone saw it will never be able to remember their 1990 match without that reality breaking into and overwhelming the fantasy of what was. Aside from that, Havoc was a decent show, marred by having too many matches and lasting too long, and that's both from a spectator standpoint and the fact they had to refund so much money. There was nothing great, but most of the match wasn't abnormally awful or anything either. It would be difficult with a great undercard to give a show where the marquee match was this bad a thumbs up, and this show didn't have anything that could remotely be close to being called a great undercard. Before the opener, Rick Steiner came out for an interview. I was expecting Chucky, who was yet another major no-show, to jump him and lay him out so he wouldn't wrestle Scott. Instead, it was Marcus Bagwell who came out and said he wanted to watch his back. Basically, WCW fools its fans so well with all these swerves that everyone in the building knew he was going to turn on Rick. Pretty well everyone was booing Bagwell even though he had been turned face. When he asked to be his partner, everyone booed despite the announcers working overtime and trying to pretend they and the crowd weren't being skeptical. When Rick accepted, they booed again. 1. Chris Jericho, Chris Irvine, retained the WCW TV title beating Raven, Scott Levy, in 7:49. Raven at first walked out basically intimating he'd been up all night and didn't know ahead of time he was even having the match. Jericho made fun of him and he came back in and worked the match as the face. Good match. Raven dropped Jericho on the ring steps and then springboarded off the stops with a drop kick on the floor. Jericho came back with a hot shot and a springboard drop kick. He missed a dive off the apron and crashed onto the guard rail, but came back and whipped Raven into the rail. Jericho undid the turnbuckle pad, but Raven ended up slingshotting Jericho into the unprotected buckles. Jericho did a great move rolling out of a German suplex into a lion tamer, but Raven made the ropes. Raven hit a DDT in the middle, but Jericho kicked out. Jericho used a low blow and German suplex for a near fall. Jericho then collided with Chris Kanyon on the apron. Raven went for the DDT again, but Jericho reversed the move into another lion tamer and Raven immediately tapped out. The announcers told the story of not being able to understand why he could struggle for so long the first time and make the ropes, but this time tapped out immediately. 3 stars. 2. Wrath, Brian Clark pinned Mang Yuli Fifita in 4:23 with a meltdown. Some boring chance. Wrath, at his size, did a flip body block off the apron. 3/4 of a star. 3. Disco Inferno, Glenn Gilberti, pinned Juventud Guerrera Angel Gonzalez in 9:39 to earn a cruiserweight title match later in the show. Aside from one blown early spot when Guerrero went for a rocker dropper and Disco apparently forgot the spot, it was a good match. Guerrero was probably the best wrestler on the show. At one point, after monkey flipping Inferno to the floor, he did this skin the cat type of move into a head scissors on the floor that I've never seen before, and he cracked his head on the floor flipping while doing the move. Disco used the forearm off the top for a near fall. Guerrero used a pescado and also hit a hot Frankensteiner out of nowhere. After a series of reversals and near falls, Disco dropped Guerrero's throat on the top rope and gave him a neck breaker. He used a giant swing, lost his balance, but in fall down, landed with a headbutt to the groin, one of only 5,732 crotch shots on the card. Guerrero got near falls with a Frankensteiner off the top and a spin kick off the top before Disco got the pin with a pile driver. 3 stars. Scott Steiner did an interview and brought out the Giant, and challenged Rick to a tag team match, saying since the NWO does what it wants to, he should have just told the truth and said since nothing in WCW makes any sense, that Giant and him would defend the tag titles against Rick and Bagwell. J.J. Dillon came out and okayed the title match, which is perfectly consistent since the last time somebody pulled something like that, J.J. had to call up from his sickbed to nullify the title change because it made no sense and heaven help a WCW angle that makes no sense. He then said should Scott and Giant lose, that Rick would get his singles match with Scott on this card. 4. Alex Wright pinned David Bart Simpson Finlay with a neckbreaker in 5:09. Davey Boy Smith was scheduled as Wright's opponent but that was changed the day of the event. Match had no heat and some boring chants, which was too bad because actually everything they did was solid and they worked really well together. 1 1/4 stars. 5. Perry Saturn Perry Sotelo pinned Lodi Bradley Kane in 350 with a Death Valley driver. Saturn came out with his chain mesh type of top that looked right out of downtown San Francisco. Originally Eddie Guerrero was to face Saturn but he had a transportation problem, missed his flight, and arrived late. Lodi had little advance warning. 1/4 star. 6. Billy Kidman Pete Gruner retained the WCW Cruiserweight title pinning Disco in 10:49. No heat. This was an independent style match in that Kidman tried a lot of moves that he didn't quite hit. It picked up into a decent match. At one point Kidman did a bulldog off the apron to the floor. Disco hit the piledriver but collapsed from exhaustion and didn't go for the pin until late and Kidman kicked out. Disco did a front suplex for a near fall and started dancing the Macarena. He did that in the earlier match as well, and it was hilarious both times. He went for the piledriver but Kidman escaped and Kidman scored the pin with a shooting star press. 2 1/4 stars. Next up was the best thing on the show, which was the Conan Low Rider video from San Diego. Awesome. The crowd was cheering heavily, it was so good. 7. Rick Steiner, Robert Reich-Steiner, and Bagwell beat Scott Steiner, Scott Reich-Steiner, and Giant Paul White to win the WCW tag titles in 8:24. This 2-match series had a great storyline, but little in the way of wrestling. Giant was back to smoking cigarettes as he came to the ring. Bagwell was crotch chopping. It almost seemed like it was a response to losing the ratings because the other guys are more off the edge. Giant threw Rick around early. Scott tagged in and continued the punishment, but Rick came back on him and Scott took 2 hard bumps. Bagwell tagged in, and to the surprise of absolutely nobody, gave Rick a low blow and walked out. Scott gave Rick a low blow and they were doubling on him and the fans were chanting for Goldberg. Rick made another comeback and was hit with another low blow. Giant then climbed to the top rope and it took him literally forever to get his balance, but then again, when was the last time you saw a 500-pound guy try to balance on the top rope? Giant came down with a missile dropkick but Rick moved, so he hit Scott. Rick pinned Giant after a bulldog off the top rope to get the titles, which got a huge pop. 2 stars. 8. Rick Steiner pinned Scott Steiner in a no DQ match in 4:46. Rick was on top but the man with the cast iron crotch was stopped only momentarily by his 4th low blow in the previous 6 minutes. By this point the crowd didn't even react to the low blow and it got no heat. Rick came back. They did another hop the rail angle, this time with Bagwell in a suit wearing a Clinton mask. Well, it is Halloween Havoc. Stevie Ray gave him a slapjack and he nailed Rick and ref Charles Robinson. The bell rang for no reason at this point. Rick still kicked out of the pin. Scott used the Frankensteiner off the top rope on Rick, who kicked out again. Bagwell, who had unmasked by this point, threw Charles Robinson out of the ring. Rick came back and dropped Bagwell's throat on the top rope. Nobody cared. They blew the $1 million angle long ago. Rick hit the bulldog off the top on Scott and Nick Patrick ran in from the back to count the pin. After the match, Bagwell was screaming, "Where's Monica?" 2 stars. 9. Scott Hall beat Kevin Nash via countout in 14:19. Very slow-paced match with a lot of brawling. Went way too long, particularly for a show that was already going so long. Both guys initially got out of their foes' big finishes, explained because they know each other so well. Nash used 2 jackknife power bombs to leave Hall laying, and then simply crotch chopped him, and walked out to lose via countout. Weird. 1 star. 10. Bret Hart retained the U.S. title pinning Sting in 1504. Started slow and never really picked up. Sting got the scorpion on but Hart made the ropes. This time Sting broke the hold. Hart acted as if he had blown out his knee, but then recovered and pulled out a foreign object. Before Hart could use it, Sting got it away from him. When he went to use it, the ref stopped him, and Hart gave him a low blow. As Sting recovered, he accidentally elbowed ref Billy Silverman, and Hart leg dropped Silverman. Bad night for refs. It's amazing the similarities in the booking of today and the booking that put Jim Crockett out of business 10 years ago. Sting superplexed Hart off the top and Hart actually landed on Silverman's legs. Sting went for a stinger splash but overshot Hart and hit his head on the metal and was knocked out. Hart then hit Sting 5 times in the upper back with a baseball bat, a few of them hard enough to make a thump. Hart then came off the top rope with a baseball bat to the throat and revived Silverman, and put Sting in the sharpshooter. With Sting out, Silverman called for the bell and awarded it to Hart. Sting wound up doing a stretcher job. It was amazing how literally nobody in the crowd took the stretcher job seriously. Not even the lightest polite applause as he was being wheeled out, and they eventually took him out in an ambulance. That stretcher and ambulance stuff has been done so much on both shows that nobody even reacts to it anymore. 1.5 star. 11. Hogan Terry Bollea, pinned Warrior, Jim Hellwig, who if you didn't know has legally changed his name to Warrior, in 1420. Warrior came out to Warrior sucks chants. I guess steroids do a number on your hearing as well as he was acting like they were all cheering him. A comedy of mistimed spots of epic proportions. After the sloppiest ref bump spot of the year, Hogan started beating up Nick Patrick. Giant came out and Hogan held Warrior. Of course Warrior moved and Giant kicked Hogan. Warrior clotheslined Giant over the top. He actually took a good bump, which was the first one of the match. Warrior decked Vincent and Stevie Ray. He went for the pin on Hogan but no ref. Hogan back suplexed Warrior and whipped him hard with his weight belt. Warrior came back with a series of mistimed punches and missed a splash. After more messed up looking spots, Hogan pulled this bag out of his trunks. It looked like some drug paraphernalia but it was flash paper. Hogan was supposed to throw a fireball at Warrior. But after attempting to light the flash paper in slow motion, he threw the fireball and nothing happened. No fireball. The whole place groaned and poor Warrior, who didn't have a clue to begin with, really didn't know what to do. This spot will be replayed for the next 100 years and at this point they had blown away the Sid Vicious Night Stalker match as the worst match of the past 2 decades. Somehow the paper then ignited for a split second, nearly burning Hogan's hand. He was supposed to throw fire and somehow ring announcer David Penzer was supposed to put his jacket on Warrior and somehow Warrior was supposed to make a comeback. Warrior improvised and came off the top twice with sledges. Hogan sliced his forehead open. Hogan then threw a low blow and threw a messed up clothesline but missed a leg drop. Horace came out. Warrior came back with 3 mistimes clotheslines. Bischoff came out to grab the ref and then Horace hit Warrior with a chair and Hogan got the pin. Horace poured lighter fluid on Warrior and they teased they were going to set him on fire, but Doug Dillinger made the save. Hogan told Horace that by doing this he'd pass the NWO initiation. That Undertaker-Kane storyline makes perfect sense. 5 stars. 12. Bill Goldberg retained the WCW heavyweight title pinning Diamond Dallas Page Falkenberg, in 10:28. Page did a great job here in leading Goldberg through a very good match of decent length. Goldberg stopped the Diamond Cutter with neck power. Goldberg looked green in spots but his power moves looked good and they had obviously practiced a lot to make this match good and it built real well. Goldberg used a leg sweep and side slam for near falls. Goldberg missed his first spear, his shoulder hit the post and he went to the floor. Goldberg was selling the right arm. Page hit a clothesline off the top for a near fall. Goldberg did a one-arm DDT. He hit the spear, but in doing so further re-injured the shoulder and couldn't get Page up for the jackhammer. Page hit the Diamond Cutter but collapsed himself, and by the time he went for the pin, Goldberg kicked out. Goldberg then delivered the jackhammer for the pin. 3.25 stars. Japanese television rundown. September 21st rings. 1. Yasuhito Namikawa beat Ryuki Wayama by a 2-0 score after 15 minutes. This was a shoot, mostly standing and a good aggressive match. Wayama was making his pro debut. Namikawa dominated, scoring points on rope breaks at 3:10 and 6:13 using front guillotine chokes to win the decision when time expired. 2. Lee Hasdell beat Kenichi Yamamoto via knockout in 10:56. This was also a shoot and a hard-hitting good match. Hasdell was the better standing fighter and kept the match on its feet, being bigger by 21 pounds and more powerful. Hasdell was pummeling Yamamoto in the corner with blows. He knocked him down with a closed fist punch to the eye, which is totally illegal, and it was so flagrant they called it a 2-point red card foul. They did a lot of trading of open hand standing, and Hasdell started working the ribs. Yamamoto finally took him down at 6 minutes, but they rolled into the ropes, causing a stand-up. This happened again. Finally Yamamoto connected with a hard shot to the face, but Hasdell responded with 4 counters to the head and Yamamoto went out. 3. Wataru Sakata beat Christopher Haseman in 12:21 when Haseman ran out of points. I believe this was the final show with the old rules allowing a lot of points, 5 allowable in this match, which means this style of real good worked matches with all the near submissions and knockdowns is going out the window. Too bad. This was a tremendous match, because it was worked but it looked so real and was very well done. Haseman may be the most underrated worker in the business. They were trading points, usually with submissions by Sakata, although Haseman had a knockdown, with Sakata up 5-3. Haseman was cut under the eye and his eyes were swelling from all the open-handed blows to the face, as there were a lot of good shots delivered. Sakata was nailing Haseman down to his last point, with blow after blow, and even though this was a work spot, it was amazing to see Haseman stand up because he was taking hard shots to the face. Haseman caught a desperation need to knock Sakata down and tie it 5-5. With each down to their last point, they were trading open hands until Haseman was stunned, although this on the replay did look like a sell, which is just about the only thing that didn't look like a shoot in the match, and he was out of points. 3.5 stars. 4. Hiromitsu Kanehara beat Willie Peters in 6:57. While Kiyoshi Tamura is the best worker in the promotion, and probably the world for that matter, for his ability to work a great pro-style match within the bounds of reality, Kanehara may be the best worker around for the ability to actually make a worked match look totally real. His match last year with Kazushi Sakuraba in Kingdom remains the all-time classic as being impossible to tell a work from a shoot. Much of the match was standing and both threw a lot of kicks and slaps and weren't holding anything back, and the mat work was quick and legit. If it wasn't for the fact Peters wasn't getting mad as he does in real shoots, and because they did so many points in such a short period of time, it might be impossible to tell. Some of the points were a little weak, like when Peters grabbed the ropes to avoid going down and was called for a point to put Kanehara up 4-1. The real Peters would have gone crazy at that call. Actually, he never would have grabbed the ropes in the first place because based on the rules it was the right call. And if it was a shoot he'd have probably fouled Kanehara a million times and Kanehara would have choked the crap out of him. Peters got 2 points with chokes to close it to 4-3 before Kanehara caught him with a choke in the middle of the ring for the tap out. 2.5 stars. 5. Tsuyoshi Kosaka beat Ilyakhin Mikhail in 12 minutes. This match was clearly a work from the start, unlike the previous 2 matches, but it was a great technical ground match. Kosaka did this flying triangle right at the bell which looked spectacular. They mainly exchanged submissions on the mat with a wide variety of moves and holds. At one point Mikhail hit a Northern Light suplex, but on being slammed, Kosaka caught him in a triangle armbar. Match was tied 3-3 when Kosaka put on a front guillotine and Mikhail didn't tap, but the ref stopped it. Mikhail, when let loose, sold the move huge as if he was choked so bad he was about to vomit. There's no truth to the rumor before this match he was forced to watch 5 episodes of Thunder without a break. 3.25 stars. 6. Kiyoshi Tamura beat Yoshihisa Yamamoto in 1852. With the exception of the Tamura Kosaka Classic, this was the best worked rings match of the year. Tamura was wearing his magic shoes because he was just unbelievable, and this match pretty well convinced me he's even better than Chris Benoit and every other active pro wrestler as a worker. Yamamoto is one of his best opponents. Because they had a 30 minutes time limit, they were given 10 points, don't ask, so it was again the old stipulations which allowed this to be a classic, and considering just how good this entire card was, the best show of the year for rings, and with the exception of the New Japan G1 shows which were off the charts for this year, as good as any card I can come up with. I think changing the rules and trying to do more shoots is a mistake. These guys have gotten so good it's very difficult to tell their works from their shoots, and in Tamura's case, when you can tell, it doesn't matter because the works are so much more entertaining matches. Yamamoto dominated early, going up 5-0 in the first 11:21 with 3 rope break submissions and a knockdown. The difference between this and the previous good matches on the show is the standing and mat work were awesome, whereas in the Haseman match, the standing was great, and in the Kosaka match, it was the mat work that was great. Tamura scored a knockdown and near fall to close it to 5-3, but Yamamoto got a choke to make it 6-3. Tamura nailed a high kick to the head, which he'd been teasing the entire match, and Yamamoto went down to make it 6-5, but Yamamoto came back with body blows to make it 8-5. Tamura got a knee bar in the middle, but Yamamoto, in dramatic fashion, struggled all the way to the ropes for the break. Tamura scored a strong kick to the chest and grabbed a front guillotine for the tap out. 4 1/4 stars. October 11th KRS Pride 4, this was largely reported as the best KRS show to date, but it would still be a thumbs down pay-per-view, which makes 4 in a row from this company. The major difference between KRS, which seems to have good matchups on paper but bad matches in the ring, and UFC, which has generally been having great shows over the past year, is a few major problems. The oversized boxing ring seems to allow for more stalling than an octagon, although this is the smallest of the problems. Having no judges' decisions leads to fighters stalling for a draw, knowing as long as they survive it's not the dreaded loss, and gives no incentive for being aggressive. Having no stand-ups when the action is at a snail's pace on the ground, while less artificial, also allows for sitting in the guard and waiting, making for boring spectator fights. And no rule banning a fighter from laying on his back for extended periods, as there is in UFC because a stand-up would be ordered, compounds the earlier stalling problems. One thing they do different than I see as a minor positive, in that it treats the event more like a sports contest as opposed to a television show, is that in KRS, when there is a stoppage, the time clock automatically stops. In UFC sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. It doesn't seem to be a uniform rule. As a pay-per-view event, this show lasted 5 hours and 18 minutes. I've seen some house shows that were really good, but as a general rule, that is way too long. By the time it's over, you feel like you deserve a medal for watching it rather than it being a show that is entertaining. 1. Igor Vovchanchyn beat Gary Goodridge in 5:51. Goodridge came out like he was in a cell and separated the bars to get out. Thought I was having 1990 WCW Return of RoboCop flashbacks. Goodridge threw him down but was caught in the guard. Vovchanchyn got hit and got a bad cut over his right eye. Most of the match saw Goodridge on top in the guard. Vovchanchyn made it to his feet and they traded punches. Goodridge was momentarily stunned by a punch and staggered into the corner but had already regained his bearings when the ref stopped the fight. The stoppage was ridiculously early and just about nobody could believe it was over. Since pretty well nothing happened and the finish was bad, it was a real bad fight, too. Akira Shoji beat Valid Ismail in 1:27 of the second round. Shoji blocked Ismail's attempted takedowns early but eventually was taken down but got the guard. Shoji took a flurry of punches at 6:30 and Ismail then got a mount and threw punches, cutting Shoji under his left eye. After some more punches, Shoji reversed him and got up, but Ismail took him down again with an ankle pick and remained on top until the end of the round. Ismail had lost his stamina just about completely when the second round started as he was getting rocked with punches and didn't even attempt takedowns. Shoji caught him with a series of unanswered punches and the ref stopped the fight. The stoppage may have been premature, but at best it was only 1 or 2 punches early and those punches were coming and Ismail was done. Better 1 punch early than 1 punch late. Match was fair. 3. Shunsuke Matsui and Sanae Kikuta went to a 3-round draw. A very even, 30 minutes dull fight. All 3 rounds were very even with one or the other holding guard and no telling blows or near submissions. I'd say Matsui slightly won the first round. Matsui suffered a slight bloody nose in the second round which I'd give to Kikuta. Third round saw Kikuta on top but Matsui, who appeared to be in better condition, throwing more blows from the bottom. He turned him in 5:35 and from the top was punching Kikuta's ear. Fans booed the closing moments because nobody ever got anyone in trouble. I'd give the third round to Matsui and if you couldn't vote for a draw, then he was the slight winner. Both worked hard for 30 minutes but it was a boring spectator fight. It was the kind of match that would put normal fans to sleep. 4. Kazushi Sakuraba drew Allen goes over 3 rounds. This was a really weird fight to judge, and remember, with no judges, that does change the strategy as neither were fighting to impress to win, knowing that it had draw if they could just last. Goes had Sakuraba in trouble more often than Sakuraba had Goes in trouble, so by that standard you could say he should have gotten a decision. However, Goes was stalling laying on his back for much of the fight, so he was totally unaggressive and not trying to win, but just to survive, so in that sense Sakuraba probably should have won. However, it was an effective defensive technique and as long as it's legal, even though it isn't crowd-pleasing or an attempt to win, Sakuraba couldn't figure out what to do and his skills were largely neutralized. They had a hot first 2 minutes before Goes just laid on his back until the 5 minutes mark. Sakuraba was already bleeding from the ear by this point. When Sakuraba got another advantage and backed off to let Go's back to his feet, Go's again laid on his back. From that position Go's tripped him up, got his back and nearly got a choke, but Sakuraba reversed him again. Sakuraba by this point got a kick to the face, which bloodied his nose. Go's then went to his back again. Go's took him down with an ankle pick, but Sakuraba nearly got a triangle. Go's went for a choke but got reversed. First round to Go's. In the second round, Go's threw some punches to the face and Sakuraba's nose was bleeding from a second cut. Sakuraba was holding guard but Go's passed it and got his back, and went for a choke but was reversed at 4 minutes. Sakuraba nearly got an armbar. Sakuraba went to his feet at 6:30 and Go's just laid on his back again, stalling until the end of the round. This round goes to Sakuraba. Sakuraba was tiring and Go's got on top to start the third round. He got another near choke but Sakuraba escaped and got the top. Sakuraba got up and Go's again laid on his back for almost 3 minutes. Go's got up, Sakuraba took him down and Go's again laid there and wouldn't get up as the crowd booed. Third round could have gone either way, but it was clear at the end Go's was stalling for the draw and Sakuraba was wanting to fight for the win, but Go's accomplished what he set out to do. Sakuraba left giving the body and facial impression that he felt disgraced by his performance. Because Go spent so much of the match stalling on his back, this was another boring spectator fight overall, but when they were fighting both were technically real good. 5. Satoshi Honma beat Yuhi Sano in 9:24. In the film clips before this match, they showed Sano performing as a pro wrestler, which looked so weird on a shoot show. Honma came out to Giant Baba's entrance music so you can see who he grew up watching. One-sided brutality, as Sano was a real good pro wrestler, but he's not much of a shooter. Honma decked him with a punch in 30 seconds. Sano took him down but Honma got away and connected with some punches. Sano was first bleeding from the mouth. After Honma connected with punches and knees, Sano wound up with 2 different cuts above the left eye and 1 below it. Honma kept tagging him and Sano was soon bleeding from the nose as well. Soon Sano was cut from the right eye. Honma kept tagging him and Sano was covered in blood, and with all the different cuts it was like a sick comedy. The doctor checked Sano and allowed him to continue. Lucky him. Honma was taking him apart with his kicks and knees to the head. Honma finally chopped him down with a leg kick and pounced on him, throwing blow after blow from the mount. In this case the ref was a little late on the stoppage. It was a total massacre. 6. Alexander Otsuka beat Marco Ruiz when Ruiz decided he couldn't continue after the second round in one of the biggest upsets in combat sports history. It was so funny to see them show clips of Otsuka also doing pro wrestling, and having Tiger Mask, Michinoku version, in gimmick, as his second. Ruiz had Boss Rutan as his second. In commentary they mentioned that Otsuka took the pro wrestling first name Alexander, naming himself after Alexander Karelin. Otsuka got a big pop coming out. Forget rumors that Ruiz was on steroids and blew up because of it. No way he was on steroids. Ruiz went for a choke right away but Otsuka got on top. Otsuka wanted to stand up but Ruiz also laid on his back. Otsuka was kicking his leg while he laid on his back and Ruiz was trying to trap him by the ankle for a submission, but Otsuka escaped and got on top. Ruiz went for an arm lock but Otsuka escaped. Ruiz reversed, got the mount and started punching him in the face. Otsuka turned to avoid the blows and Ruiz went for a choke, but Otsuka protected his neck so it was more like a face lock. And the bell rang to end the round. Otsuka had a bloody nose and a bloody lip by this point. Ruiz was noticeably tired when the second round got going, and hung by the ropes to stall for a second wind and avoid a takedown. Otsuka finally took him down at 4:40 and threw a lot of punches to the face and nose, and small chopping punches. Ruiz was cut under the left eye. Otsuka threw 2 more punches and Ruiz was bleeding bad from the right eye. Crowd was going nuts and Otsuka got aggressive and was tagging him. Ruiz was totally out of gas in the waning moments of the round and he staggered to his corner and decided to end the fight. Naturally the place went nuts when Ruiz quit. In a show of great sportsmanship, Otsuka got on his knees and bowed before Ruiz. Best match of the show. 7. Mark Kerr beat Hugo Duarte in 2:32 of the third round. More of the same. Fight consisted of 2 positions. Kerr taking Duarte down and being caught in the guard. Or Kerr standing wanting Duarte to fight on his feet and Duarte, like Go's and Ruiz, laying on his back. He laid on his back most of the first round. Duarte had a cut on the cheek. In the second round Duarte suffered a big cut under the right eye. The doctor checked but allowed him to continue. Kerr was on top and accidentally headbutted him and was given a warning. Kerr stood up. Duarte laid there. Kerr jumped on him and got a few shots in before Duarte could get the guard on. Kerr got up and Duarte again laid on his back until the end of the round. When the third round started, Duarte simply fell to his back. Crowd was booing like crazy. It was just enough of that tactic for one night. Kerr walked to the other side of the ring waiting for him to stand and he wouldn't move. Ref ordered him to stand. At first he wouldn't, then he got up and immediately fell back down. At this point Kerr jumped on him and got a few shots in again before he could get guard. Duarte then pulled himself out of the ring. It looked like he was just going to quit, but he came back. Kerr threw several more punches and Duarte again got out of the ring and the ref had enough and stopped the fight. It was as bad as it sounds. Poor Kerr. Every fight he's had in Japan has been a total cluster and none have been his fault. 8. Rickson Gracie beat Nobuhiko Takada in 9:30. This was a competitive good match. Takada looked so much more confident going to the ring this year as compared with last when he walked in like he was attending his own funeral. The first 6 minutes were largely both on their feet struggling in a collar and elbow type lockup. Takada broke free and hit a knee and a punch and Gracie countered with a punch of his own. Takada backed into the corner where both stood and traded short knees. Takada delivered 2 good knees and momentarily got him down, but before he could control him Gracie was back to his feet. Gracie had a real worried look on his face as this was clearly not as easily as he expected. Takada took him down at 6:25 but Gracie got guard. Gracie from the bottom was ear punching. Takada went for a leg lock and got revered. Gracie mounted him and threw punches. Takada went for a heel hook but Gracie escaped, mounted, and quickly got the armbar. Even though he lost, Takada left looking really pleased with his performance. He knew that this year, even thought the result was the same, the result really was entirely different. The Emperor of Shooting Style Pro Wrestling really was wearing nice clothes when he left the ring this year. Mexico. A deal was struck over the weekend in Las Vegas between Paco Alonso, the head of EMLL, or CMLL as it's now largely referred to, and Eric Bischoff and Sonny Wanu. We're not sure of all the details, but from what we understand, there will be a WCW versus EMLL feud at Arena Mexico, likely with Wanu as the lead heel manager for the WCW team of Mexicans, led by Conan and La Parka, which would mean that Parka, Psicosis, and Rey Mysterio Jr., none of whom have ever worked Arena Mexico, will likely appear there, which should pop business huge. Part of the deal as well is that WCW is paying Alonso to oversee its talent in Mexico. There has been a controversy of sorts ever since WCW began using the Mexican talent of WCW not wanting them to work in Mexico. Originally WCW owned their rights in the US, and would get hot when they'd work for Mexican or indie promoters in California. Since then WCW's contracts with the guys, which range from about $80,000 to $180,000, Conan and Mysterio Jr. are earning significantly more, give them all worldwide rights. However, many of the wrestlers have continued to work Mexico. Because there are so many shows in so many places in Mexico, it's a total impossibility to monitor whether the guys are violating their contracts unless they work the publicized shows in Mexico City or Monterrey or in a border city like Tijuana, and there are numerous small shows in Tijuana that never get publicized. Alonso is in charge of monitoring the situation, but even for him, there are so many small shows around the country and the communication system is nothing like the US, and it's an impossibility. The Ocesa pay-per-view show drew about 8,100 fans live to the 30,000-seat outdoor Palacio de los Deportes in what was described as intense cold. The lineup looked terrible to begin with, and from most accounts, so was the show. It was all built on xenophobia, with Mexican heels and faces teaming together to represent the country against foreigners. In the main, Cien Caras and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Pierroth Jr. and Tinieblas Jr. beat Salomon Grundy and Fabuloso Blondie, Ken Timms, and the Headhunters in what was billed as a prison of death cage match. The first team to have 2 members escape from the cage won. The Hunters, who have been faces in Mexico of late, were billed as the Bronx Bombers to get them over as the heels. Rayo and Pierroth ended up escaping from the cage to win. Pierroth stuck out his hand and said basically that this was for Mexico, and when Rayo went to shake, Pierroth attacked him and began ripping at his mask. The Mexico vs. Japan series saw Atlantis and Brazo de Oro first beat Mitsunobu Kikuzawa and Nozawa of Japan, but then Fujin and Tsubasa beat Felino and Fuerza Guerrera when the latter team couldn't get along. This left rivals Negro Casas and Scorpio Jr. to face Magnum Tokyo and Yoshihiro Tajiri. Casas and Scorpio couldn't get along, and it went up with Fuerza Guerrera coming out to help Scorpio beat up Casas. Felino then came out to help his older brother, Casas. While they were all fighting, the Japanese went for dives, but the Mexicans moved and they crashed, and wound up in the ring and the Mexicans pinned them. The other international match saw Villano Tercero and Tinieblas Sr. and Brazo de Plata and Mascara Sagrada beat Heartbreaker and American Destroyer and Born Killer and Ricky Banderas. By virtue of all the wins, some of the local newspapers actually reported this as proving that Mexico had the best wrestlers in the world. Halcón Negro Jr. won the CMLL welterweight title beating Olympico on October 23 at Arena Mexico, which sets up a hair versus hair match between the two of them for October 30th. October 30th will also start a tournament to crown new CMLL tag champs, as Mr. Niebla was stripped of both the tag team and trios titles for not defending them due to his injury. Niebla and Shocker held the tag titles while Niebla and Lismark Sr. and Atlantis held the trios belts. There will be two 4-team tournaments, the first being on October 30th with Bestia Salvaje and Scorpio Jr., Villano Tercero and Fuerza Guerrera, Atlantis and Lismark Sr. and Headhunters. Hunters are now booked in Mexico through November 8th, so they aren't going to win this tourney. And the second on November 6th with 4 teams not yet named. The winner of each tournament meets for the title on November 13th. The idea is apparently to try and move Olympico up the ladder as a top babyface by winning a big masked match. To build up the pay-per-view, Pierroth and Headhunter A were on a Mexican talk show on October 21st and Hunter bashed Pierroth with a chair and ripped his shirt. 4 of the Japanese wrestlers including Yoshihiro Tajiri were also there and attacked both Pierroth and Fuerza Guerrera. The next day in Ovaciones, Dr. Alfonso Morales said the October 24th show should be cancelled because there were some technical paperwork that wasn't filed on time with the commission. And also because they were running a cage match and he's of the old school Mexican belief that cage matches shouldn't be allowed. After Pierroth missed the October 16th show on October 21st, EMLL said he would be out of action until November 2nd due to a stomach infection. That press release was so ludicrous because he was working angles on television and working the rival pay-per-view show right in Mexico City. El Hijo del Santo is doing an injury angle, and from all accounts he is really somewhat banged up, so there is some legitimacy to it, in Mexico City, but still wrestling in high-profile matches around the country, and anyone who reads the magazines can find this out. Santo pinned Felino to retain the WWA welterweight title on October 18th in Monterrey, which was the 16th anniversary of his pro debut. This was set up on October 11th in the same city when Felino in a trios match used Santo's own camel clutch to make him submit in the third fall. Box E Lucha listed nominees for PAPSA, formerly AAA, and EMLL for year-end awards that will be announced on December 7th. For Best Rudo Heel, EMLL has Scorpio Jr., Dr. Wagner Jr. and Mascara Año 2000, and PAPSA has Cibernetico, Abismo Negro and Sangre Chicana. For Best Technico Face, EMLL has Atlantis, Emilio Charles Jr. and Negro Casas, and PAPSA has Octagon, Heavy Metal and Latin Lover. For Best Tag Team, EMLL has Headhunters, Santo and Casas and Scorpio Jr. and Bestia Salvaje, and PAPSA has Pero Aguayo and Pero Aguayo Jr., Duro y Directo and Pentagon and Abismo Negro. El Satanico defends the CMLL middleweight title against Negro Casas on October 27th at Arena Coliseo. A minis match with Mini Rey Mysterio Jr., Max Mini and WWF, and Bracito de Oro beating Espectritos Uno and Dos, Mini Vader and Mini Mankind, got a standing ovation on October 25th at Arena Coliseo. Some historical notes on Dr. Alfonso Morales, the new Box E Lucha editor who was very anti-Antonio Pena and Conan and pro-CMLL. He debuted as a boxing announcer in 1969. In 1978, while broadcasting the Carlos Cerati vs. Wilfredo Gomez boxing match, he was given a National Sports Broadcasting Award for his work in the high-profile match. He was hired full-time by Televisa in 1980 and covered the last 4 Summer Olympics for Televisa. He got a Lifetime Broadcasting Achievement Award in 1986 and had done play-by-play for 350 boxing title matches including Tyson Holyfield, along with being the most well-known voice of pro wrestling in Mexico. His first pro wrestling broadcast was El Santo's retirement match in 1983, and you can imagine how high-profile an event that was. Apparently he's cleaned up the magazine and increased the boxing coverage since taking over last month. Some talk of a Super Astro vs. Fishman masked match. PAPSA running a major year-end show on December 13th at El Toreo in Naucalpan. On October 30th in Puebla they are taping TV with Cibernetico vs. Sangre Chicana for La Trofeo Amo de Escándalo, which is basically a trophy for the ultimate kick-ass fighter. Mascara Sagrada beat America in a mask vs. mask match on October 4th in San Luis Potosi. America was Roberto Grimaldo, 29, who wrestled as Tauro Jr. at the start of his career and is the son of El Tauro. CMLL has officially forbid its wrestlers from working the IWRG shows in Naucalpan over the Niebla deal. Punishment is immediate firing. Lismark is now saying he's going to retire before the end of 1999, not 1998, with some speculation he'll retire this coming March. The Rayo vs Cien Caras CMLL heavyweight title match from October 13 aired on Galavision over the weekend. It was about as bad as you'd imagine the Hogan-Warrior match would be going in. Hogan-Warrior in actuality was significantly worse. Anyway, in the commentary, when trying to get over the heavyweight title, the announcers were talking about the long history of the title and bringing up former great champions of the past as a comparison like Jimmy Londos, Strangler Lewis and even Frank Gotch, and while watching out of shape Rayo and Ancient Cien missed spots in slow-mo for 3 falls made for some awesome unintentional comedy. Also got a chance to see some of the now Culpon matches with Ultimo Dragon's students. I saw a 6-man which included Dragon Kid and Magnum Tokyo. Tokyo is a great Mexican babyface doing the stripper gimmick a la Latin Lover. Although that gimmick would be a huge heel deal in the US, he's actually an amazing worker when he's allowed to show it given his level of experience, just over 1 year in. Dragon Kid is very reminiscent, in fact, in many ways better, than Rey Mysterio Jr. at the same stage. He did one of the most mind-blowing moves I've ever seen. He gets on the top and does the flip like he's doing the 450 but lands on the shoulders of the guy standing and flips backwards. How he does that is beyond me, although Rey Jr. has done similar moves, into a Hurricane Rana. He does the move totally professional, no botching or sloppiness at all, and does the springboard Hurricane Rana with the same precision of Rey at his best. He also has only about 1 year in the business and has phenomenon written all over him. Both debut in Japan on Ultimo Dragon's January 31st Korakuen Hall show. October 30th in Tijuana has Fabuloso Blondie and Salomon Grundy and Rompe Corazones versus Pierroth and Rayo and Tinieblas Jr. and Mexican faces and heels teaming together against the Bad Americans and Blue Panther and Satanico and Fishman versus Super Astro and Negro Casas and Venom Black. All Japan. With as much being made of the ratings war in the US, there was an amazing stat on October 25th, but the All Japan TV and All Japan Women's TV show went head-to-head on Sunday night. AJW aired from 1:25 a.m. to 2:50 a.m., and each show did a 4.7 rating. Those numbers in that time slot for each show are considered tremendous to the point it could result in significant upgrades in wrestling time slots. Fuji TV, which did the rating building to a main event showing the Svetlana Gundarenko vs Shinobu Kondori supposed shoot, which ironically was an LLPW match although many of the women groups are working together on the TV show, has gotten incredible numbers for monthly shows the last few months, and there is a lot of talk of moving women's wrestling to a more regular, better time slot. During the 80s, women's wrestling did unbelievable numbers, often in the 13s, on Saturday afternoons. Nippon's 4.7 rating was for the match taped the day before at Korakuen Hall where Kenta Kobashi and Jinsei Shinzaki beat Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa when Kobashi pinned Misawa after a reverse Death Valley driver, in that he had Misawa in a torture rack before doing the move. This makes twice on this tour where Kobashi has pinned Misawa, and that would mean in typical All Japan booking that Misawa would be expected to capture the title from Kobashi on October 31st, although this may be the time to break pattern. Kobashi has vowed to debut a new move on the card which he's going to call the Kobashi Special, and that will be the move he beats Misawa with. Nippon as an experiment is now going to air the December 7th All Japan TV show for 45 minutes instead of the usual 30 tag team tournament finals, and is talking about next year expanding the show to 45 or even 60 minutes. Vader has agreed to work 20 weeks in 1999. It's a mistake on their part to use him on complete tours for all the reasons previously discussed. Not much in the ring as they are continuing with house shows that draw poorly. October 11th TV did a 2.8 rating. New Japan. The UFO debut on October 24th at Tokyo Sumo Hall was largely considered a success even though the work itself was pretty bad as it was mainly ex-UFC fighters trying to do a cross between work shooting and pro wrestling. The show drew about 6,500 fans, announced as 10,000 but that's a fake number, which was considered good because the lineup had no marquee value. It was virtually all Antonio Inoki fans who came to see Inoki live as most of the fans there really didn't seem to know most of the wrestlers. Speaking of Inoki, at the Rikitosen Temple last week not only did Satoru Sayama shave his head but so did Inoki, who showed up almost totally bald. The fans popped more for pro wrestling spots than working UFC spots. In the main event, Naoya Ogawa beat Don Fry in 7:42 when Ogawa got the choke on but Fry didn't tap and the referee stopped the match. Fry went crazy when the match was stopped and attacked Ogawa and tried to attack Inoki as well. The match had a lot of heat because of Fry's charisma. It appears they did the finish to set up a rematch on either December 30th or December 31st at Osaka Castle Hall, which is a 15,000-seat arena and where they will bomb unless they give all the tickets away. In the semi, Brian Johnston and Gerard Gordeau went to a no contest in 5:26 when Gordeau thumbed Johnston in the eye and Johnston left the ring. It wound up in a pull-apart brawl with former UFC fighter David Beneteau in Johnston's corner hitting the ring along with Igor Mindert in Gordeau's corner. Mark Hall beat Joe Charles in a real bad match as both were trying to do pro wrestling and neither knew how. Charles injured his arm and then the refs stopped it. The first Tiger Mask, Sayama, beat out of shape Kevin Rosier in 4:07 with a knee lock in a match the fans enjoyed even though Rosier looked terrible. In New Japan, the Big Angle is setting up the new tag team of Keiji Muto and Satoshi Kojima building up to doing a Wolfpack type of gimmick, although at this point they are still teaming with the other NWO members on the tour. Eric Bischoff legitimately has veto power over new members of the NWO. Bischoff wouldn't allow Big Titan in, for example, and while he did OK Kojima on October 23rd, there was a lot of heat because New Japan did the angle already and then faxed Bischoff asking for his approval. He wasn't happy since they didn't tell him the angle first. Muto and Kojima were the first team announced for the Supergrade Tag Team Tournament from November 16th to December 6th, ending at Nagoya Aichi Gym. Muto also said he was going to recruit Genichiro Tenryu to join the NWO. Now the newspaper speculation is that Riki Choshu will come out of retirement for one show at the January 4th Tokyo Dome to face Ogawa. The story they are trying to get across is that Choshu has been training every night before the shows with the younger wrestlers, and since he hasn't wrestled in almost a year, his injuries have healed up. New Japan's big show of the week was October 24th in Fukuoka before 5,200 with Muto and Kojima beating Shinya Hashimoto and Yuji Nagata in the main event. Jushin Liger retained the IWGP Junior title beating El Samurai while Tatsuhito Takaiwa and Shinjiro Otani retained the IWGP Junior Tag titles beating Kendo Kashin and Koji Kanemoto. Scott Norton was scheduled to return on the Fukuoka show, but didn't arrive due to suffering a shoulder injury on the October 19th Nitro. It was announced he'd arrive on October 28th instead, and still defend the IWGP Heavyweight title against Hashimoto on October 30th in Hiroshima. The Yokohama Bay Stars captured the Japanese Baseball World Series 4-2 over the Seibu Lions. In the World Series MVP was Tadanori Suzuki, the left fielder who was one of the guys who seconded Masahiro Chono earlier this year at the Tokyo Dome and is one of the guys who they did the gimmick that Chono was training in preseason and is considered a member of the NWO and wears NWO t-shirts all the time on television. Don Frye and Brian Johnston have been added to the October 30th Hiroshima show to face Yuji Nagata and Kazuyuki Fujita. Kazunari Murakami, who beat Lee Young-gun in 122 at the UFO show, issued a challenge after the match to Maurice Smith for the December 30th show. Smith knocked out Murakami with maybe the single greatest punch ever on one of those shows in an Extreme Fighting pay-per-view in 1996. October 10th TV did a 3.1 rating. Other Japan notes. Rings opened its Battle Dimension tournament on October 23rd in Nagoya before a hugely disappointing crowd of 4,550 in the 9,000-seat arena. It's pretty clear going to the team format instead of the individual format isn't what people want. The way they do the team deal is an old New Japan gimmick from the early 80s. Each team picks a batting order of sorts, and matches continue with the winners advancing until one team has nobody left, and that team is the loser. All matches have 10-minute time limits. With a draw, both men are eliminated, and the first point knockdown or rope break loses. On the show was Netherlands beating Russia and Japan beating Bulgaria. In the former, Netherlands opened with Hansa Nyman knocking out Sergei Susarov, but then Ilyagin Mikhail of Russia beat Nyman with an ankle lock. Dick Frey then knocked out Mikhail in 2:50, but Volkan ankle locked Frey. This left each team with one member, and Joop Kasteel won it for Netherlands when he knocked Han out. The other matchup saw Wataru Sakata beat Todor Todorov, but it did him no good because Sakata was injured so badly he couldn't continue. Yoshihisa Yamamoto beat Boris Jelyaskov, but Dimitar Petkov beat Yamamoto, leaving Petkov versus Hiromitsu Kanehara, and Kanehara won for Japan, with an armbar in 4:55. If you notice, in every case, every winning wrestler lost his next match, so the story being told is that the fresh wrestler almost always beats the guy who just wrestled, and thus, nobody is really hurt losing to the fresh guy. In a non-tournament match, Kiyoshi Tamura beat Vladimir Klementiev at 7:51 with an armbar. It now appears that the Akira Maeda vs. Alexander Karelin match in February will take place at Yokohama Arena as opposed to the Tokyo Dome. They are also attempting to bring Karelin in for a tune-up match on the January Budokan Hall show before facing Maeda. It was announced that Takada Dojo would be joining Pancrase for the December 19th Pancrase pay-per-view from Tokyo Bay NK Hall. This immediately led to lots of printed speculation about a Masakatsu Funaki vs Nobuhiko Takada main event, which would be a huge draw. What we get is that it'll probably be Kazushi Sakuraba and Shunsuke Matsui from Takada's group, but not Takada, who earned $200,000 for the last two matches with Hickson Gracie, and the price he demand is way out of Pancrase's ballpark. They are looking at bringing in a major MMA star to face Funaki. Pancrase sold out Korakuen Hall on October 26 with 2,100, with Funaki losing via decision to Kyuma Kunyoku in the main event and Keiichiro Yamamiya also scoring an upset, winning the decision over Jason DeLucia. In a really sad story, Minoru Suzuki, one of the founders of the group, and at one time one of the top submission guys around, but has taken far too much punishment and needs to get out, lost in just 45 seconds to Omar Buish with a choke, who last year he beat in a matter of seconds. Even though Pancrase is sport fighting as opposed to UFC, which allows face punching and punching on the ground, people who have done both will say that Pancrase is a physically tougher sport, partially due to the schedule, and nobody in Pancrase is going to have a lengthy career at the top as we're seeing. But what is sad is that both Funaki and Suzuki, who were along with Ken Shamrock, the best of the first-generation stars, not that they are now losing, but that both were knocked out and took terrible punishment on the pay-per-view show on September 14th, and both were back fighting on October 26th. All Japan Women announced its 30th anniversary show on November 29th from Yokohama Arena, with the first ever meeting of Manami Toyota vs Chigusa Nagio as the main event. Other matches announced were Kumiko Maekawa defending the All-Pacific belt against Tomoko Kuzumi of JWP, and Takako Inoue and Norio Tatano, LLPW vs Shinobu Kondori and Harley Saito, along with a battle of hill teams with Zaps INT vs Eagle Sawai and Shark Tsuchiya from LLPW. There will also be a Legends 6-man tag. Teams haven't been announced, but the women will be Jaguar Yokota, Devil Masami, Lioness Asuka, Asia Kong, Dynamite Kansai, and Yumiko Hata. They're also going to bring back and honor literally dozens of Japanese wrestling historical stars dating back to Satoko Inokari, the very first Japanese female wrestler ever in the 50s, people like Yukiko Tomoe and Shiru Obita, who beat Moolah for the title when she was on tours, and legends like Aiko Kyo. First WWWA champ Miyoko Hoshino, Jumbo Miyamoto, Mach Fumiake, youngest world champ ever at 16, Mariko Takagi, Meiki Ueda and Jackie Sato, famous as the late 70s tag team The Beauty Pair, Yukari Amori, Dump Matsumoto, Bull Nakano, Akira Hokuto, etc. Reggie Bennett has trimmed down to 176 pounds, she's dropped 66 pounds just in the last several weeks, and is training regularly at the Pancrase Dojo for her shoot match with Rosina Elena in December. Elena, a Soviet judo champ, won a 1996 shoot tournament put on by AJW and tapped out Bennett in the match. Bennett, who is 37, has decided to go out with a blaze of glory since she figures this is her last chance to accomplish something in sports for real. The Sheik will be coming, not to wrestle, to second Sabu when Sabu returns for the FMW/USO deal in December. A new shoot-style pro wrestling group called U-Dream, headed by Ken Suzuki, the former president of UWFI and Kingdom, debuts on December 11th in Toyama with Yoji Anjo, Yoshiaki Fujiwara and Tatsuo Nakano as the top stars. Daisuke Ikeda and Hayabusa captured FMW's World Brass Knucks tag titles from Hiromichi Fuyuki and Yukihiro Kanemura on October 26th in Chiba. On the FMW November 20th pay-per-view show, they haven't announced Atsushi Onita's new opponent now that Mr. Pogo, he's using that name again since the guy who used the Mr. Pogo name is wrestling in FMW as Gosaku after Great Pogo beat him for the name, has pulled off the show. Besides Hayabusa vs Hiromichi Fuyuki for their world title will be Bam Bam Bigelow and Chris Condito vs Geto and Jado, Takamichi Inoku and Shoichi Funaki vs Hayato Nanjo and Muhammad Yone, the return of Mr. Ganasuke after blowing out his knee and having reconstructive surgery vs Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Hisakatsu Oya vs Koji Nakagawa, plus fans get take photos with Tammy Lynn Sitch. November 23rd Battlers at Sumo Hall besides Road Warriors vs Otsuka and Yone and Takamichi Inoku and Shoichi Funaki vs Minoru Fujita and Ikuto Hidaka and Yuki Ishikawa vs Hisakatsu Oya has semifinals and finals of the B Cup with Great Sasuke vs Bob Backlund and Naohiro Hoshikawa vs Minoru Tanaka. On October 23rd in Osaka, Sasuke pinned Victor Kruger and Hoshikawa beat Masaaki Mochizuki in first-round matches. Backlund was brought back for the show teaming with Yuki Ishikawa to go to a 35-minute draw with Oya and Otsuka. Katsumi Yujita of Battlers went to a draw with Yasunori Matsumoto, an early 40s guy from Chicago, in a Valley Tudo match on a kickboxing show on October 25th at Sumo Hall. Great Sasuke is working full-fledged heel teaming with Sasuke the Great Masao Orihara on the current Michinoku tour. Former controversial Weekly Pro Wrestling editor Tarzan Yamamoto worked as a manager on the Toyonobori Memorial Show put on by Full on October 22 at Korakuen Hall. This isn't an angle, upset the editor of Gong to the point the magazine stopped shooting the show. Yamamoto used a similar Mr. Wally mask that Antonio Inoki used that day at the airport when he brought Naoya Ogawa back from the US and attacked promoter Hisashi Shinma, who already this year did the angle with Pierre Roth. Here and there. The final USWF event of the year most likely took place October 24 in Amarillo before 3,500 and was described as from a talent standpoint the highest quality show in company history. This group used more people with international reps than ever before in its top matches. Evan Tanner, who is now with Pancrase and is getting strong consideration for the next UFC, retained his heavyweight title beating former UWFI pro wrestler Gene Leidig in 4:45 with a choke. UFC approached Tanner about fighting Vitor Belfort at the last UFC, which Tanner turned out because he was given no advance notice. This is when Jerry Bullander went down with a knee injury, and has been talked with about appearing on the January 15 show with possible foes discussed with him being Chuck Liddell or Carlos Newton. USWF promoter Steve Nelson had also faxed a proposal to Dan Severn to come to Amarillo and challenge Tanner for the title, and he's also interested in bringing Tank Abbott to Amarillo to challenge Tanner for the title. Paul Jones retained the light heavyweight title beating another former UWFI pro wrestler, Billy Scott, best known for beating former World Cruiserweight Boxing champ James Waring in a bizarre mixed match many years ago and headlining a pay-per-view against Nobuhiko Takada in 1603 with a choke when Scott took his second rope break. USWF rules only allow for one rope break. Jones was said to have dominated the match. The middleweight title, which Nelson vacated upon his retirement, came down to Ali Elias, who has fought with Shudo and Adrian Serrano, the Extreme Challenge champ who has been appearing with Pancrase, with Elias winning with a front choke in 3:53. In the lightweight title match, Eric Payne retained over Bobo Navarrete in 2:38 with a choke. There probably won't be another Amarillo show until April, but there may be shows in either Lubbock or Odessa before then. The NWA held its 50th anniversary show with indie wrestlers from around the country coming to Cherry Hill, New Jersey on October 24 for a show generally labeled as a fiasco as only about 500 fans attended, and has gained more talk for the expected split up with Todd Gordon and Sandman walking out before the show over a booking dispute with Dennis Coraluzzo. Apparently the plan going in for the show was to have Doug Gilbert turn on Coraluzzo and Stevie Richards turn on Gordon, as part of the cage match between Coraluzzo's crew and Gordon's Hot Stuff International crew. This would build the angle through March where the climax would be asking Peggy and Tommy Gilbert, at the Gilbert Memorial Show, to wind up putting the boots to Gordon as revenge I guess for Eddie. However, Coraluzzo, feeling that the angle was dying, wanted to nix it at the show and he and Gilbert wanted to blow it off, and Gordon, hearing the new plan, felt double-crossed and walked out with Sandman before the show. This has led to the predictable charges and counter-charges back and forth. If only people promoted wrestling to run a profitable business instead of promoting wrestling to make themselves celebrities to wrestling fans. The hidden secret is that unless you're a wildly profitable company like WWF, WCW or New Japan, you can't afford the luxuries of trying to get over at the expense of the guys. And if you go out of business, you're no longer going to be over with those marks you're trying to be a celebrity for. Anyway, the show itself was largely panned and the Cauliflower Alley banquet got mixed reviews, depending upon how much people wanted to see guys like Blassie, Dez and Hodge live. Dan Severn beat Steve Regal in 31-10 in a match described as being as exciting as watching paint dry. Regal was in poor condition. The NWA tag titles in the four-way ended up with Eric Spraxia and Knuckles Nelson, who won over Tully Blanchard. From all accounts, Blanchard isn't WCW bound, and Tom Pritchard, subbing for no-show Barry Windham, who was apparently pulled from the show by WCW, Border Patrol and Chris Germany and Kit Carson from Texas. Ace Darling and Storm, formerly Devon Storm with a new gimmick a la Raven, won the NWA 2000 tag titles from Lupus and Harley Lewis. Headbangers beat Stephen Dunn and Reno Riggins via DQ, so the latter team retained the NA tag titles. Abdullah the Butcher beat T. Ranchula in a bloodbath. Lots of backstage heat because all the wrestlers were told this was an ECW and not to brawl in the crowd since the event was at a Hilton hotel. Butcher of course didn't listen. When asked why he didn't listen to instructions, his response was, "Because I'm Abdullah the Butcher." It does beget the question of why use him if he has to stay in the ring. Steve Williams won the WWF Dojo Battle Royal and after the match did a stare-down angle with Kurt Angle. Easy Rider beat Paul Atlas in what was billed as an NWA Canadian light heavyweight title match, and Kevin Quinn and Christopher Daniels beat Danny Dominion and Ace Steel in an NWA Midwest tag title match. At the NWA annual meetings, Howard Brody was elected president and Bill Behrens, Music City Wrestling, was elected vice president. The remainder of the board of directors are Dennis Coraluzzo, Ernie Todd, Canada, Steve Rickard, New Zealand, Victor Quinones, Japan, and Tony Rumble, New England. The main item of business is that the Music City TV show, which actually has more airplay nationwide than any other show except WWF and WCW, is being converted into a multi-promotional NWA show airing tapes from all the different NWA offices. Jim Ross apparently gave a great speech about Danny Hodge when he was honored. Ross also gave speeches honoring Fred Blassie and Gordon Solie. Luthez Butcher and Dory Funk were almost among those honored at the NWA deal. Former WCW wrestler Joe Gomez appeared on one of those TV court shows. Seems Gomez, who by the way now runs a sushi place in the Tampa area, did a deal where women bidded for a date with him at a muscular dystrophy benefit auction in 1996. A woman paid $500 for the date, but he never went out with her. Even though she paid the money, the judge threw the case out. Jesse Ventura has gotten a ton of pub for his third-party candidacy for Minnesota governor. Last poll showed him at 21% of the vote, which was amazing because at the time he hadn't spent any money on radio or TV advertising. He came off real well in debates with the other candidates, which doubled his poll figures. He was interviewed on MSNBC this past week. Yokozuna was unable to wrestle due to his license being pulled on October 23 in Bayonne, New Jersey, so the Jersey All-Pro show subbed Dan Severn in the main event against King Kong Bundy with a DDQ finish. Some notes from Austria. The promoter of the CWA shows in Hanover is Peter William, and not Otto Wanz as listed here. The promoter of the weekly Lucha Libre shows in Houston happens to be Adrian Fernandez, who apparently is the most famous race car driver in all of Mexico. MMA. Besides the Inoue win over Couture and Pederneiras win over Sato, among the other major matches on the Shudo Valley Tudo Open on October 25 saw Noboru Asahi go to a 24-minute draw with Joao Roque. Frank Trigg, an American wrestler who in a submission tournament in Abu Dhabi earlier this year lost on points to eventual tourney champ Renzo Gracie, and a result that a lot of people watching thought was a major gift, defeated Jean-Jacques Machado of the famous Machado family, cousins of the Gracies who heretofore have never fought in this style of competition, but in some circles legends had the Makedas as actually being better than the Gracies. In 1620, when the ref stopped the match due to blood, an unbeaten Vladimir Matyushenko of the Raw team went to 4-0, beating Kenji Kawaguchi in 3-10 via knockout from punches. As the current plans go, it appears plans for the Vitor Belfort vs. Frank Shamrock match are to hype it on the next pay-per-view, keeping both men off the show, and try and sign it for the main event in March in Brazil. Watching the replay of the tape of the Belfort-Vanderlei Silva match from UFC, Belfort actually threw 16 punches in 6 seconds, and hit on like 13 or 14 of them. It was absolutely amazing, his hand speed, power and accuracy. UFC has added a new rule making it illegal to grab the opponent's trunks after what happened in the Pat Miletic-Mikey Burnett match on October 16. If someone wears a gi, it can be grabbed or used since that's a legal judo tactic. There are other rule changes being contemplated. Real TV did a segment on Shamrock on October 23. Sport Magazine is working on a UFC piece. Ugly American, well actually not ugly, but this was a story going around Japan in the wake of the Pride show. After pro wrestler Alexander Otska pulled off his upset, American MMA reporters asked him who he was looking forward to fighting next, and he immediately responded, the Road Warriors, who he's facing at Sumo Hall on November 23 in his first ever high-profile pro wrestling match. The reporters started laughing, thinking Otska was telling a joke, but he wasn't laughing in the Japanese. They were cringing at the Americans' reaction, being one of those cultural moments of being in a different country and not getting it. Even though pro wrestling is predetermined, Otska grew up in a world where Marco Ruiz didn't exist and the Road Warriors were superstars, and in the world he works in, the Road Warriors, because they haven't been in Japan in recent years and people haven't seen just how bad they've gotten, are still legends, and only a few people even know Ruiz. And in Japan, predetermined or not, pro wrestling is a tough, serious business, and not like it was for years in the US as simply the butt of jokes. Tank Abbott is signed to headline the Super Brawl 10 show on November 18 in Guam against Lance Gibson, who last year went 27 minutes with Dan Severn. This is where the stuff gets dangerous. Abbott was knocked out in Brazil, and just for fighter safety he really shouldn't be fighting for 45 to 90 days after being knocked out, and November 18 is 32 days. Problems like this is where MMA could run into trouble, although since they aren't regulated, there are no rules they need to follow and the only rules are self-imposed, and you know how dollar signs affect those kind of rules. That was one of the problems with the MMA death in Russia and the Draka death in Los Angeles this year, in that both went into the ring having suffered a concussion within a few weeks of the fight and then died from blows. ECW. The November 1st pay-per-view lineup at Last Word was the Triple Threat vs. Triple Threat Dudleys, who won the ECW tag titles from Sabu and Rob Van Dam on October 24th in Cleveland, defending the belts against Masato Tanaka and Balls Mahoney, Tommy Dreamer and a mystery partner against Chris Condito and Jack Victory. Lance Storm vs. Jerry Lynn with Mikey Whipwreck and Tammy Lincich as referees, a tag match with the FBI and one more match. On this coming week's TV show they are going to tease that new Jack is the mystery partner, as he'll do an interview saying it's him and then got attacked by Victory with a guitar shot. Victory will then proclaim he's hurt so badly he can't be. Most likely it'll wind up similar to the deal they do at all the house shows where everyone in the world runs in. On TV they made it clear that Terry Funk wasn't going to be the partner and teased that it might be Raven, which it won't be. Paul Heyman has been interested in using Vader in the spot. Vader had told people he wanted to rest up until All Japan and the two hadn't talked as of the weekend, but a play may be made to bring him in. Heyman had considered bringing in Yokozuna to do a job for Spike Dudley, but the Louisiana Commission told him he couldn't because all the commissions respect each other's suspensions and New York pulled his license due to failing the physical due to obesity. This may be the toughest pay-per-view to draw thus far because the Triple Threat vs. Triple Threat angle really didn't take off and nothing on the undercard has been pushed that hard. Far more importantly, the loss of television in New York isn't going to help. However, ECW has a very loyal fan base, as since the first show all buy rates have ended up steady in the 0.20 to 0.24 range. It was the biggest money weekend in company history, as October 22nd in Buffalo drew 3,500 fans and $71,000. October 23rd in Pittsburgh drew 3,374 paying $62,000. October 24th in Cleveland drew 2,371 paying $42,000 and October 25th in Altoona, Pennsylvania drew 1,100 paying $24,000. They also did for the week $83,000 in merchandise, which is $8.70 per head. These numbers are phenomenal for a company of this size. Taz waived his right to a preliminary hearing this past week and requested that his case in Pittsburgh for indecent exposure to go right to trial. Lynn was all banged up after the weekend, but it likely won't keep him off the pay-per-view, but he was talking openly, wondering about his future in wrestling. Sabu suffered a smashed-up mouth in the tag title change match when Van Dam threw a chair at him and he didn't catch it. He chipped 2 teeth and loosened a few others and was bleeding really bad from the mouth. All charges against Alex Rizzo, Big Dick Dudley, regarding the near riot at a house show in Long Island when he went into the stands were dropped on October 21st. Shane Douglas and Sabu did a double pinfall draw on October 23rd in Pittsburgh. Douglas was said to have looked much better this past weekend. In the tag title change, after the match, Tanaka and Mahoney attacked the Dudleys to set up the pay-per-view match. The TV match from Philadelphia, which was so hot they changed the programs, was over huge. Mahoney and Bubba Ray Dudley have really improved of late. Mahoney actually did a plancha, which is amazing for someone around 330 pounds to take that kind of risk. Dudley did a tope, and he appears to, if anything, have gained weight of late. Tanaka was the glue, and they had tremendous heat for the finish built around sick chair shots to the head back and forth. The follow-up pay-per-view show will be called Guilty as Charged on January 10th in Kissimmee, Florida at the Millennium Theater, the TV studio that they used to film American Gladiators at. WCW. Nitro on October 26th in Phoenix drew a sellout 14,688 paying $315,615. Stevie Ray beat Kenny Chaos of High Voltage in 208 when Marcus Bagwell gave Ray the slapjack and he used it. After the match, Rick Steiner picked Chaos to be his tag team championship partner. Kenyon beat Prince Iaukea with a flatliner in 311. Horseman did an interview. Steve McMichael wasn't there as he no-showed after too much fun in Vegas. Bischoff came out and said he'd made a mistake about underestimating Flair's popularity and said Flair would wrestle later in the show, which didn't happen. Alex Wright pinned Barry Horowitz in 248 with the neckbreaker. Wrath pinned Sick Boy with a meltdown in 251. They missed a lot early, but the crowd popped big for the finish. Actually, this was the best Nitro crowd in a long time as they popped big for a lot. Kevin Nash did an interview and was attacked by Holland Giant and thrown through a wall. Bischoff and Hogan did an interview where they made Horace a new NWO member and called him Horace Hogan. Saturn beat Eddie Guerrero via DQ in 4:42 when Damien and Hector Garza interfered. Good TV match. Saturn was cleaning house on all three when the next wave of Mexicans ran in, including a newcomer. The newcomer was a longtime friend of Guerrero's who wrestled in Juarez about 10 years ago when Eddie and Conan were first breaking in. I believe his name is Art Flores, real name. His wrestling name was something else, and he'll be positioned as Guerrero's bodyguard. Judy Bagwell did an interview. One interview too many. She got booed and she wasn't good. Rick Steiner and Chaos kept the tag titles, beating Giant and Ray in 3:16 when Steiner did the Bulldog on Ray. Chaos was, by far, the best thing in the match. Giant looked terrible. He's gotten so slow with his weight gain and was paying so much attention at one point that he forgot to kick out of a near fall and the ref had to hold up his count, making everyone look dumb. They aired a clip of the 1994 Bash at the Beach match where Hogan won the WCW title from Flair. Bischoff said he meant they'd show a tape of Flair, not that he could wrestle on TV now. The tape was edited to show only Hogan on a fence. Hogan looked a good 10 to 12 years younger, and it was only 4 years ago. Kidman pinned Juventud Guerrera to keep the cruiser belt in 5:55 with a shooting star press. A fantastic match. I don't think you could do a better match in less than 6 minutes. Scott and Bagwell came out and wound up attacking J.J. Dillon. Warrior did an interview and even he got a huge pop. It was his hometown, and he wound up cleaning house when Hogan, Giant, and Vincent tried to attack him. Hall and Scott Steiner NC Conan and Lex Luger, a match that was a wild brawl with superheat that actually looked real bad, and they simply went to a break, and when they came back, everyone was gone. Finally, Page won the U.S. belt from Hart in 10:48 with a diamond cutter. Very good match. Hart destroyed Page with chair shot after chair shot to the knee. He put the sharpshooter on and Page sold it great. Brett did a super heel job here. Finally, Goldberg made the save as the show went off the air. Thunder on October 22nd in Albuquerque drew a sellout 6,163, paying $145,000. It also drew a 4.06 rating, which is one of its best Thunders, and a 5.7 share. Rey Mysterio Jr. pinned Super Calo in 4:16 with a Frankensteiner off the top. Mysterio Jr. was supposed to be out for 1 week due to scar tissue in his knee but wound up working 3 nights later. Great TV match. Eddie Guerrero offered Mysterio Jr. a spot in LWO but he turned him down. DDP did an interview and got booed out of the building. He was visibly miffed by the crowd response. In Vegas, it didn't appear he got booed at all. Wright pinned Johnny Swinger in 3:25 with a neckbreaker. Fans chanted USA. Swinger is Canadian and Wright is German, but nobody knows Swinger is Canadian. Jericho beat Canyon in 9:07 to keep the TV title when he put Raven in a lion tamer and he tapped. Finish was totally retarded but match was good. A fight in the stands killed the heat, though. Saturn pinned Norman Smiley with the DVD in 4:20. Luger racked Scotty Riggs in 5:46. Guerrero pinned Iao Kia in 4:03 with a moonsault. Guerrero was awesome. He is without a doubt the best worker right now in the Big Two. After the match, Guerrera, Disco and Kidman did a three-way which was one big spot after another climaxed with a big Guerrera dive. Conan beat Scott Armstrong in 3:12. Conan was super over. Conan was supposed to wrestle Eddie and I don't know why it was changed. Dean Malenko beat Kendall Windham with a cloverleaf in 1:28. Windham did some mic work that seemed to build up something where Barry will come into work against Malenko. Sting beat Giant via DQ in 2:41 when everyone ran in. In matches taped for October 28, Thunder, Guerrera beat Villano V, Finlay pinned Wright, Jericho beat Disco, Wrath beat Van Hammer, Disciple beat Mean Mike, Kidman beat Chavo Jr., Malenko beat Eddie via DQ and LWO ran in and Horseman made the save, Saturn beat Swinger, and Steve Armstrong beat Hall doing the drunk bit. In a dark match, Goldberg pinned Meng. As part of getting Warrior to agree to do the job on the pay-per-view, he was signed to a new contract which picks up when the original 36-show deal for 7 figures expires. Lots of educated speculation that Dusty Rhodes will be doing the announcing on the new roller derby show. Bad idea, as it'll make the show dated, and the announcers are very important in getting something like this over, and Rhodes is exactly what isn't needed. The Bret Hart movie premiered in England on October 19th at the Sheffield Film Festival. Apparently it was very well received, including the premiere getting a standing ovation. The premiere in Toronto will be November 10th and there are plans for a Calgary premiere on November 12th. It'll air on TV in the Maritimes and British Columbia on November 14th, and in Ontario on November 18th, and is apparently scheduled to get a lot of the TV magazine covers that week in Canada, including the papers in Toronto, Winnipeg, and Calgary. It is set for airing in the spring of 1999 in England and France. The first showing will be December 20th, not December 18th as was originally scheduled. Lots of talk that Davey Boy Smith and Jim Neidhart are gone. Smith's new agent has tried to get him out of his contract so he could return to WWF, although I'd be surprised if WWF takes him. The Los Angeles Times major wrestling story looks to be coming out around November 15th. They were in Phoenix for Nitro. Apparently the author was blown away because he was talking to fans and they were talking to him about things like quarter-hour ratings, and it wasn't anything like what he expected. About 24 members of the Cardinals were at Nitro, and Charles Barkley was backstage. Eddie Guerrero showed up with a bad black eye, and the reason it wasn't that noticeable is because he was wearing heavy makeup. Some talk of keeping Sting out of action until as late as January after the angle at Havoc. It's a great job if you can get it. WCW Saturday Night on October 24th did a 2.1 rating. The New York Times story on Mark Madden's situation ran on October 25th. Basically a straightforward story that really didn't take any sides. It's considered a very important case when it comes to legally deciding what is and isn't a journalist. Courts have ruled journalists have privilege to maintain their sources but have not clearly defined exactly what a journalist is. The first ruling, that Madden was a journalist, was because he gathered information with the intent to disseminate it to the public. The three-judge appeals panel overruled, claiming he was an entertainer and was disseminating hype, not news. Obviously he does a little of both. The story said Madden is paid $350 a week by WCW to do hotline reports in addition to current jobs of writing a weekly column for a local newspaper, hosting the Pittsburgh Penguins radio pregame shows and doing a daily sports talk show on Woody in Pittsburgh. Madden testified that he is paid by WCW for giving performances on the hotline. When Madden was subpoenaed, he was asked, among other things, to provide the names of his sources for his insults to Vince McMahon. Jerry McDevitt said that if he didn't give up his sources, he'd seek to have him cited for contempt of court. WWF claimed that WCW uses Madden's 900-line reports to get out disparaging info on WWF. WCW lawyers said Madden blends factual reporting with his own style of satirical editorial commentary. When Madden was asked if he had met fans who called the 900 line and what their view of his credibility was, he said he had met people and said these people never once treated the matters I spoke about as reality. There was an article on Eddie Guerrero in the Sumter, South Carolina Daily Item on October 21st when he was in town to do a George South religious benefit show with Brother Hector. Guerrero, who is deeply religious, admitted falling victim to temptations as a wrestler, and the story talked about the death of Art Barr. Guerrero said the autopsy showed no drugs in his system, not true, but admitted Barr had been involved with alcohol and drugs and was taking a number of prescription pain pills at the time of his death. Guerrero said it just could have as easily been him. Guerrero said he didn't approve of a lot of the current direction of the business, saying he was offended when Hulk Hogan calls himself God and said after doing that, Hogan has changed that to saying he's the god of wrestling. He knocked the WWF's direction as well. House shows this week saw Saturday night tapings on October 20th in Mankato drew 2,799 paying $59,487. October 21st in Duluth, Minnesota draw 3,664 paying $72,508 and October 23rd in El Paso drew 8,487 paying $195,890. We don't have merchandise figures for the past week. Another New York Times article on October 26th was about sports losing their ratings power among men. It noted the MNF decline and did mention the popularity of the wrestling shows as a main reason for the drop. On the Time magazine internet balloting for Man of the Century, Ric Flair is now in third place trailing Jesus Christ and Adolf Hitler. Raven is in ninth place. The reason there is no Flair merchandise like the credit card is because he hasn't signed his new contract. His court date regarding the legality of the contract and his being a free agent is about 1 month away, although it doesn't seem like much of a possibility that he'd leave if he wins a release. WWF. Early returns indicate the WWF Judgment Day pay-per-view did in 0.89 buy rate, which would be an estimated $3.99 million company gross, or slightly above what most of the recent shows have been doing. The Survivor Series will consist of the title tournament and a Sable vs. Jacqueline women's title match. Basically all the top names will be in the tournament. There are several ideas on the board as to what to do, but the bracketing should be announced on the November 2nd Raw. There are suggestions to have the first 2 rounds be a 10 minutes time limit with both men eliminated in case of a draw. Expect at least a few double elimination finishes as the way it's planned. They'd have to do 16 matches in less than 3 hours. Most people expect Rock to win. There is internal feeling that Steve Austin is so over that he doesn't need the belt to draw, and they point to the phenomenal house show business since Austin has lost the title as proof. Also in Madison Square Garden on October 25th, in the four-way, Austin pinned Rock and not Kane to win the match. But the way wrestling is today, and remember this whenever you hear people talk about plans for PPVs more than 3 weeks ahead, this business changes totally every Tuesday when the new ratings come in and long-term planning doesn't exist. It isn't a definite, but it appears Hunter Hearst Helmsley won't be back for Survivor Series. He doesn't appear to need reconstructive surgery, but the estimate for his return is around December 1st. Triple H is also in the midst of a contract renegotiation as his current deal has just under 1 year left. One of the reasons for the poor Undertaker vs. Kane main event at the pay-per-view is because Undertaker once again had back spasms as the match was going on, which limited greatly what he could do. Chyna's storyline of being gone until her legal case is finalized is an excuse to get her off TV while she has reconstructive facial surgery. The surgery is to repair her underbite and the painful jaw problems resulting from it. It isn't as much cosmetic as to reduce the jaw pain, although it is a little of both. The first Super Astros taping will be November 1st in Austin, Texas. Bruce Pritchard is heading that project and went to Mexico and signed several wrestlers, including Leo Del Santo. WWF debuts on Network 10 in Australia from 9:30 to 10:30 p.m. Saturday nights. And the celebrations. Shane McMahon was only pulled from Heat this past week. Michael Cole and Jim Cornette to the show, as the story is that he was in negotiations with Austin, and he'll be back next week. Hopefully with a character makeover. Shane McMahon did a great job in his Raw promo, but Vince McMahon's acting gets worse by the week. I used to think McMahon was an awesome performer, but after the past 2 weeks, besides being horribly overexposed, he's becoming this one-dimensional character that having to show a range can't act at all. Other Raw notes. Singh vs. Godfather was a terrible match. They turned way down the crowd noise so you couldn't hear the swearing in the crowd chants. They also turned the crowd noise down big time in the Outlaws match, which also appeared to have no heat. Thought the Snow and Mankind deal came off as silly. The gimmicks both are campy on their own, but put together it was really bad. October 25th in Madison Square Garden saw headbangers over Hardys, Edge over Godfather, Mero and Jacqueline over Venus and Sable when Jacqueline pinned Sable after Venus was attacked by Goldust. Golga and Kurgan beat too much. Austin pinned Rock to win the four-way in a cage. Rock left and Undertaker and Kane brawled with each other to the back. Austin stunned ref Slaughter. McMahon came to ringside and acted like he was going to climb in the cage. This allowed Boss Man to come from the other side and destroy Austin. Gangrel pinned Goldust in a match with no heat when Venus distracted Goldust. X-Pac beat Jarrett via DQ when Jarrett used the guitar. This sets up a rematch at the next MSG with a guitar on a pole. Animal and Drozdov beat DOA. Hawk and Drozdov argued after. Shamrock won a triple threat over Vader and Mankind with the ankle lock on Vader. After the bout, Mankind put the Socko Claw on Shamrock. It was Vader's last WWF show. Outlaws beat Henry and Brown in the finale, which was anticlimactic. Venus is still getting huge face pops despite being portrayed as the heel in the Goldust feud. Goldust is getting great ring entrance reactions, but crowds die once his match starts. Gangrel signed a new 3-year contract and Rock's new deal is set to be for 6 years. They are shooting vignettes with Jeff Jarrett and Deborah McMichael. Mark Canterbury is still in traction most of the day. The part of the big bodyguard for Motley Crue on Raw was played by Andrew Martin, who should be starting on TV shortly. Most of the house shows will remain through the end of November with the four-way matches on top with Austin, Rock, Undertaker and Kane, plus street fights with Shamrock vs. Mankind. Although Madison Square Garden falls on the date of a live Heat taping, because of the union and origination costs of doing TV from MSG, they are going to do that Heat taping on December 15th, in Spokane, Washington. MSG looks to be headlined by Austin vs. Big Boss Man, perhaps with Austin winning, getting 5 minutes with Vince, who hopefully will be out of the wheelchair once the movie plays. Austin was interviewed by People magazine this past week and will appear in 2 of their year-end issues. One is one of the breakthrough stars of 1998, and another is one of the sexiest bald men. He will also be handing out an award at the Billboard Music Awards on MTV on December 7th, and in January Will is negotiating to appear in an episode of Silk Stockings. An Undertaker comic book should debut in January. Matt Bloom, Sean Stasiak, McTierney, Aaron O'Grady and Vic Grimes are scheduled to start in Memphis on November 7th. The England-only pay-per-view on December 6th in London will be a title match with Austin, Rock, Undertaker and Mankind, so expect one of those four to win the title, with Bossman as ref. Shamrock defends IC belt against Blackman, Triple H vs. Venus, LOD and Drozdov vs. Outlaws and X-Pac, Jacqueline vs. Sable for women's title and Regal vs. Goldust. The Stone Cold Metal CD debuted at number 174 on the Billboard chart, selling 8,017 units last week. House shows for the week saw the TV taping on October 20th in Madison, Wisconsin draw 10,220, 600 shy of capacity, paying $179,458. October 21st in Green Bay drew 5,180, 100 shy of capacity, paying $109,365. October 22nd in Rockford, Illinois drew 4,308, paying $98,530. October 23rd in Charlotte drew 17,682, paying $374,906. October 24th in Greensboro drew 13,688, paying $267,632. And October 25th at Madison Square Garden drew 18,086 total, just shy of a sellout, and 15,226, paying $369,906. Merchandise for the week was $422,083 or $6.80